Good evening. I'm Jane Donnelly. I'm the education spokesperson for Atheist Ireland, and I have to follow that. Our two previous speakers, and I have to keep time because I've been keeping everybody else to time. And as well as that, I have my 3 daughters in the audience, which makes me very nervous. So I was going to start because we have Atheist Ireland has an education policy based on human rights. Our education policy is secular education based on human rights. So we have used human rights principles and human rights law to get our rights. That's what we are doing on the ground in Ireland. So I wanted to give, to show how it works for us, and it is working for us, and how the practical application of using human rights law helps us to get our rights. We did have another speaker coming, but due to family reasons she couldn't come, and she was somebody from the Magdalen Laundries and representing that group. So I've incorporated something about that into my speech, just to give that whole area, get it represented here today. I just want to start saying that Ireland is a republic. Now, we might forget that sometimes, but it is a republic. Equality and non-discrimination are principles in a republic. We'll be fooled. You'll be fooled when I finish here telling you what goes on here in Ireland. Ireland has a good international record with regard to human rights. As a country, we value human rights. If you say human rights to somebody, they think that's great. They think it's a wonderful thing, human rights. It has a moral standing, human rights, in Ireland. Ireland has signed up to many UN and Council of Europe treaties, such as the European Convention on Human Rights. In particular, Ireland has ratified the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and the UN Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. We have also ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child. This all sounds really great. On the face of it, we should be very happy with our human rights record. If that is the case, how come last week the Irish Human Rights Commission said the following? The Irish Human Rights Commission are a statutory body, and a very conservative one. This is what they said. The Irish state failed to protect and vindicate the human rights of women in Magdalen Laundries. The Irish state failed in its obligation to protect women and girls. Girls and women placed in Magdalen Laundries did not have their human rights fully respected in relation to equality, liberty, respect for private life, education, and to be free from forced or compulsory labour or servitude. That is an absolute disgrace. An absolute disgrace. The fact of the matter is that Ireland has failed to respect the human rights of girls and women. These laundries were run by the Catholic Church. The Human Rights Commission went on to say that stronger regulation and oversight of the relationship between the state and non-state actors carrying out state functions or services is required. Now, I'd say a little bit stronger than that. In addition, standalone legislation that defines forced or compulsory labour or servitude as a criminal offence in its own right and with a strong enforcement mechanism should be introduced. Overall, the state needs to cease its dependency on institutionalising certain groups in society and support them to live to their full potential in the community. Non-state actors. Who would they be? In many areas of life, the Irish state absolves itself of the responsibility to protect the human rights of its citizens and delegates that to private bodies and institutions. These bodies interpret these human rights according to their religious beliefs and not according to human rights law. There's a language of human rights, and sometimes when I'm speaking about human rights, I talk about the human rights that are in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I talk about human rights law. The Catholic Church talks about authentic human rights. They use the word authentic human rights. They're not. We don't speak the same language. We're not speaking about the same things. And that is a key point, that when you hear them talking about human rights, they're not talking about the rights that are inherent in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They just speak their own language, their own dogma, and it's two completely different things. In a recent case at the Irish Supreme Court, the court found that the state was not responsible for the protection of a child from sexual abuse in a primary school. This was a public funded school. That case is now at the European Court of Human Rights. Now just think about that for a minute. In a republic, the state is not responsible for the protection of the most vulnerable citizens from sexual abuse in a public funded school when they were accessing their human right to education. Basically, this means that the agents of a foreign state are legally responsible for the protection of children from sexual abuse in day schools in Ireland. The Irish education system is unique. You will not find another state that hands over control of the schools to the agents of a foreign state. Over 92% of primary schools in Ireland are controlled by the Catholic Church. So how do we fight a system like this? How do we hold the state responsible for the protection of our human rights? In that case at the European Court, we moved a step forward because the Irish state got up and said they weren't responsible, that Louise O'Keeffe, who was taking the case, she should have sued the Catholic Church. But she didn't. She sued the state and failed at the Supreme Court. No, said the European Court. She could have sued the Catholic Church, but she sued you. And you are responsible because the Catholic Church didn't ratify the European Convention. The Irish state did. So she is holding the Irish state responsible for the protection of her rights under the European Convention. She is saying that she, as an Irish citizen, has a right to the protection of the state and protection from a non-state actor. Atheist Ireland has an education policy that seeks secular education based on human rights law. We have used and are using the mechanisms in place at the UN and Council of Europe to fight for our human rights. We make submissions to various UN and Council of Europe bodies. It's a great thing to be able to do, to be able to use those mechanisms. And we use the comments of the UN on various articles in the conventions. For example, on freedom of religion or on freedom of conscience, the UN has said in the education system that it's secular parents that are denied their right to freedom of conscience in the Irish education system. They have said that it's secular parents that are discriminated against. They have said that it's secular parents and their children do not have equality before the law, and they have raised concern about the rights of the child in the Irish education system. Now, if you're in a situation where 92% of the schools of the state are controlled by the Catholic Church, and you can stand up in a room and say, hey, hold on a minute, you're wrong. The UN has said that it is my rights that are being denied. The UN has said that it's my rights and my children's rights and the rights of parents like me that have no rights. It is a very powerful moral argument. And any time I have done that and made that argument, I get silence. There is no answer to that because in Ireland they value their human rights record. They think that they can stand up and say to me that we have this great record here and that I know from parents contacting me and from my own experience that we are discriminated against in this country because we are secular parents and we want to bring up our children in an education system that protects their human rights. So it is a good argument and it works on the ground. The UN has stated that gender is a key factor and the context in which females are at risk, including deprivation of medical treatment, particularly involving reproductive decisions. So there is a whole area in relation to health and the right to health and the rights in the various conventions that at the moment I do not feel that it is being used. We haven't got a framework there that the groups on the ground that are fighting for their rights and reproductive rights are not using that mechanism. So that needs to change. I feel that we need to move forward with that and start using the mechanisms that are there to fight for the right to health because it is a very powerful argument. So in seeking a secular state and fighting for equality and non-discrimination, we use a human rights language. Our policies identify these rights and we use the concluding observations of the UN as a tool to get our rights. I was once at a conference, a former UN judge there, it was a good few years ago, and she said, she was talking about human rights and the Universal Declaration. She said, the UN are not coming in to rescue you, because we were all complaining about the education system. That just won't happen, she said. You must use the mechanism as a tool to get your rights. So that is what we do. We take the rights off the paper. It's only a bit of paper if your rights are on the paper. You need to take them off the paper and you need to go. And you don't ask for your rights, you demand your rights. I'm not going to ask anybody for my human rights, I demand my human rights. We will get them in the end, and we're fighting in Ireland, Atheist Ireland, strongly to get our rights. Thank you.